Good afternoon. We're here filming this to offer hope and encouragement to people who have been newly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
So, between Pete and myself, we've been living with type 1 diabetes for over 100 years now, and we want to offer support and encouragement to people who are newly diagnosed to show them that diabetes does not stop you from achieving things in your life. We're going to offer 3 top tips that we would give to you as a newly diagnosed person with diabetes, or if your son or daughter has been diagnosed recently. So, Pete, what would be your top tip?
I think probably the best thing I have ever done is to get to know other people with type 1 diabetes and be able to share my thoughts, my concerns, my worries with people. I think that's probably my most powerful message. Don't feel alone, get to know other people. What about you, Paul?
I think my tip would be that there are no limits. Diabetes does not stop you from doing anything, and later on in this video we'll be talking about some of the things that Pete and I have both done to push the boundaries of what you can do. And anything else, Pete?
I would also like to say I know complications can be extremely worrying to people. It's been in the back of my mind throughout, but to learn that complications are not an inevitable thing. I'm extremely lucky not to have any serious complications after 61 years of type 1 diabetes.
And I think that one thing I would say to people is that don't aim to get a flatline blood glucose level. We're always hearing people saying, "Oh, I'm trying to get my blood glucose level to be absolutely at 5.0 or below 100 millimole deciliters per milligram," and it's not going to happen. You will put yourself into an early grave trying to get there, and people who don't have diabetes don't achieve that either.
I would also say to parents with children with young children with type 1 diabetes that not to straitjacket them and expect them to be a really rigid 5 or 6 millimoles per litre. It's just not realistic to aim for that. Allow them a bit more freedom. It's not going to do damage in the long term.
And I think my next thing would be to ask questions. And there's no such thing as a silly question. Nobody's going to judge you for asking a question. It doesn't matter whether you've asked it once, twice, or 10 times before. If you're not sure that you understand the answer, ask again. Somebody else may explain it in a different way, and suddenly it will make sense.
I'd certainly agree with that. I used to be very worried about questioning what the professionals, the doctors and the specialist nurses used to say. But I think don't be afraid to ask questions and perhaps argue a little bit with them about things. If you believe something they're saying doesn't fit with your pattern, don't be afraid of doing that.
So you're probably wondering why we're qualified to be offering you this advice right now. So speaking for myself, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 5 years old. That was back in 1977. And I have challenged my diabetes in a variety of ways. In the early days, most of them were negative, and now I choose to challenge them in a positive way. And Pete, you were diagnosed in
1956 when I was 2 years old. Yes.
And so between us we have a lot of experience of living with type 1 diabetes, but not just living with type 1 diabetes in a normal everyday sense. So Pete and I first met when we climbed Kilimanjaro together with, there was 17 others who also had type 1 diabetes who reached the summit of Kilimanjaro with us. That was back in 2014. Pete has gone on. What did you climb last year, Pete?
I did part of the highest trek in Peru to mark my 60th year with type 1 diabetes. I wanted to make it a special occasion, so went there to raise money for JDRF and Diabetes UK and had a wonderful time.
And I celebrated 40 years of living with type 1 diabetes in 2017 by running 40 half marathons in a year. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a good runner, because I'm not, but conversely, I don't know many other people, even who don't have diabetes, that could do that. So diabetes doesn't stop you, it never will. It's about your attitude and your approach. and it's about asking the right questions of the right people. And if you don't know the right people, by asking the right questions, you'll find them.
Yeah, I totally back you up on that. I'd also like to say I'm doing my first half marathon, the Swansea Half Marathon. I've never run in my life really, except when I had to. But I think it's a new challenge for me. I'm nearly 64, so it's a new challenge for me.
And actually, that's all my fault, because I have, in 2018, we have the largest team of people with type 1 diabetes to run a half marathon together. That's going to be in Swansea on the 24th of June, and we're going to set a world record for the most people with type 1 diabetes to run a half marathon. So the world is your oyster. You can do anything that you want to do. Just find a good support group, and if you find a support group and it's not the right one for you, find another one. There's plenty out there. And the Diabetes Online community can be a wonderful thing, and you can find some great support there. But not every piece of advice you get online is good advice, and some people can become very that they can own their own belief about what they think is diabetes and what they think you can do with it. You've got to find what your personal terms of reference are, and once you've done that, then life becomes so much easier.
I'd also just like to add something, if I can. Learn to live with type 1 diabetes. I think some people try and reject it, and it becomes almost their enemy, and I think that's the worst thing you can do. Learn to live with it and accept it, and don't let it stop you doing things.
And I think on that basis, that accept that there will be good days and there will be days that are not so good. The days that are not so good, don't take them as a negative, take them as a learning experience. What went well the day before may not work today. Why didn't it work today? Try and learn something from it that you can take into tomorrow and make tomorrow an even better day than today.
Just to finalise, I think it's worth just recapping the main points there. I certainly felt that the most important thing for me was meeting other people with type 1. What was your...
that there are no limits. Diabetes doesn't stop you from doing anything.
And I think also, don't make it your enemy. Learn to work with it. It won't necessarily ever be your best friend, but it's don't make it an enemy. It's dreadful to do that, I think.
And I think the other one that Pete shared that was really, really powerful and really important is that complications aren't inevitable. You will hear so many bad stories along the way about what might happen, but actually I know so many people that have lived a very long time with diabetes and don't have complications. It is not necessarily going to happen to you, and don't live a life based on fear. And one other thing that I would say that we didn't mention before, but it's really, really important, is don't get too stressed out about one blood glucose measurement. Blood glucose measurements are good and they're valuable, but they become really valuable when you recognise them as a trend, because once you've recognised them as a trend, they're your friend, you can do something about them. Following a path of, my blood glucose level is too high or too low, and then constantly trying to treat it so that you're always in range, it's a road to disaster. You're never going to achieve it, and you'll just wear yourself out and become exhausted trying. So there are a number of organisations out there that are really worth connecting with. JDRF is certainly one of them. In America they're called the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and their mission in life is to find a cure. Diabetes UK are also an incredible resource. In America, the American Diabetes Association are an incredible resource. If you're living outside of those regions, you will have your own local associations that will offer great advice, great support. The other thing to do is to ask them if there's a local peer support group that you can actually attend in person. Online support is one thing, but actually going and meeting people with type 1 diabetes is something else entirely. And I think that Pete has a term for this. When he first met us to climb Kilimanjaro, what was the phrase that you talk about here? It's you talk about having had type 1 diabetes for 58 years before you spent time with others.
Oh yes, it was the best thing I ever did to meet other people with type 1 diabetes. And that's why my first point was to get to know others.
I think you said to me one time that it was like a fog had lifted for you when you actually spent time with other people with type 1
very
diabetes.
Very empowering.
And so go out there, find your peer support group and get all the help that you need, ask all the questions that you want, and when the time comes, you can pay that knowledge forward to other people joining the community. Video is being hosted by onebloodydrop.com, which is my website. It is a website that's dedicated to helping people with diabetes. Primarily we're doing that through diabetes and sports and exercise, and we're starting to look at diabetes and nutrition, although we're not nutritionists and we're not healthcare professionals. Come along, take a look at the site. If you can learn something from it, that's great. If you decide that you don't like our advice, great, that's also fine.
I think it's a great site. It's well worth looking at if you haven't done so already.
Yeah.
There's a lot of very good information on there.
We're primarily based around sports and exercise, but that's another huge challenge for people with diabetes. How do you manage your blood glucose levels whilst you're exercising? Well, we don't have all of the answers for you, but we have answers from lots of people, and by sharing success from lots of different people, hopefully somewhere in there will be something that rings true for you.